Thank you all for joining us today. I'm Peter Wallace. I'm the facilitator project manager for the Healing Fund for Japanese Canadians. Beside me is Judy Hanazawa, who's been working on this project for, I guess, the last 2 decades. Almost 2 decades now. And on my right side, we have Dr. Satsuki Ina, Clinton, and Noël. They are joining us from San Francisco today. And we're very appreciative that they managed to make the journey up here to help us with this important work. So we're gathered today on the unceded and ancestral territories of the Squamish, Tsleil-Waututh, and Musqueam people. So this workshop was made possible by funds from the Anglican Church of Canada, specifically the Primate, located in Toronto, and the Diocese of New Westminster, which covers Vancouver, and the Diocese of Calgary. These 3 bodies funded the Healing Fund because this is primarily where Mr. Nakayama worked during his tenure with the Anglican Church. He was immigrated to Vancouver, and then he practiced most of his professional life in the Diocese of Calgary, where his family was sent after World War II during the dispersal period. With that, I'll hand the mic over to Judy Hanazawa, who will talk about some of our early work, which provides important background to where we are today. Thank you.
Good morning, everybody, and I'm acknowledging I'm speaking on the unceded territory as well of the Musqueam, Squamish, Tsleil-Waututh, and I think the Quaquitlam Nation. So my part is to kind of give you a history of how the working group got started, and actually the initial purpose that was focused upon by the group. So I'm just going to look down a bit sometimes to look at my notes. Please don't mind that. Back to November 2006, and I see some of us are here that were together back then, and I really do acknowledge everybody who worked hard and worked on this project. But the Human Rights Committee members of the Greater Vancouver Japanese Canadian Citizens Association, JCCA, and other community members met in concern for survivors of Mr. Nakayama, his clergy sexual abuse, who were traumatized at the 2005 national campaign to save Nakayama's home. And the home was known as Historic Joy Kogawa House. It still is known as Historic Joy Kogawa House. And the childhood home of Joy Kogawa, acclaimed author and daughter of Gigi Nakayama, Mr. Nakayama's daughter. So at that time, we met with Dr. Wendy Fletcher Marsh, who was the dean of the School of Theology at UBC. And Wendy promised that she would get in touch with, and I'm nodding heads with Mary here because we were there together, get in touch with the Diocese of Calgary so that the files of Mr. Nakayama could be opened upon our request. Because we needed to know the truth rather than hearing the stories. We needed to know. But what happened was Dr. Marsh wasn't able to access anything. And she came to us to say, she sat with us to say, if you're not a victim, they're not going to open these files. In your community, you're not the survivors of Mr. Nakayama. So that was back in 2006, and things kind of, our Human Rights Committee kind of left it at that because nothing could be done to open up information. And then in 2013, a community activist, Leslie Komori, wrote an article in the bulletin, and I'm going to quote from it, just a little bit of it. It says, the community needs to demand accountability from the Anglican Church since it created the mechanism whereby Canon Nakayama could access his victims. The Indigenous nations in Canada, in their search for truth and reconciliation, offers us Nikkei a wise model to grapple with repercussions of trauma caused by the clergy. My hope is that Nikkei can follow a similar path to create a safe place to explore the truth so reconciliation may arise. So Leslie had opened the whole thing up and joined the matter of what happened to survivors to the house representing actually our community. So by December 2013, a few of us were at Kogawa House, and Joy presented herself and the experience of her father, what her father had done, and said that she wished the house could become a place of reconciliation. And Dr. Peter Elliott, who was the rector of Christ Church Cathedral, was there. I'm doing this right. And he met with us, and we had initial discussions about the church and community working together to offer community support. So things got off to that start. In 2014, I took notes. I took some notes from a Human Rights Committee meeting on February the 8th, 2014, and it says, meeting on February 12th, 2014 with Anglican Church, and I said bishop because I didn't know really what he was, Elliot, to discuss the church's knowledge about Reverend Nakayama's pedophilia, what was done by the church about it, and addressing the matter in the Japanese Canadian community. And in March 2014, Joy and her brother, Reverend Timothy Nakayama, publicly expressed their solidarity with all of those who were harmed by their father and their profound grief as members of his family. So that sort of encouraged our working group to move forward. So we began planning and community events. And the Bulletin, our news magazine, printed outreach articles about counseling support and stated our awareness of the importance of maintaining confidentiality upon any survivor families making contact. And some survivor families did make contact. And by April 19th, we had a fairly large community meeting, and the community members, including some important community activists and program providers, were asked what could be done to address the truth of Mr. Nakayama's abuse. We all were aware that survivors were aged men, over 80 mostly, and many had chosen silence as a way to put the matter behind them. And it was important to give respect and honor survivors and their families, and to offer timely support, express appreciation to those who shared their experience, and our hope for healing. By May 2014, Douglas Fenton, who was Executive Archdeacon of the Diocese of New Westminster, wrote an article for the Bulletin called Commitment to Truth and Reconciliation. And the article shared details about Mr. Nakayama's 1994 confession of sexual misconduct and the Diocese of Calgary response, resulting in his resignation in '95. And Douglas offered his personal support and contact information and concluded, the Anglican Church seeks to provide a place for the truth, no matter how painful it is to hear, to be told, and believing that in so doing, healing may begin to occur. Only when the truth is told can reconciliation be hoped for. May 2014, the working group and church began to focus upon the church's apology. And survivor family members came forward recommending points to include in the apology. June 14, 2014, we had another community meeting. And this time we had Speaker Chief Dr. Robert Joseph of Reconciliation Canada and Squamish Nation Elder Gloria Wilson as speakers. And they both provided their kind advice. And both Chief Joseph and Elder Gloria expressed from their own experience that sharing the truth about abuse was essential to beginning the healing process in offering their kind support to Japanese Canadians. In August 2014, collaboration began between the working group and church representatives on drafting the Anglican apology. We learned by the fall of 2014 the Anglican Primate assisted in developing the wording, and the Diocese of Calgary assumed a primary role in developing the final draft. I'm almost finished. In January to March 2015, the church worked on completing the apology. And by May 2015, we were planning with the church for the event when the apology was dated and presented, and that was June the 15th, 2015. So that's sort of my main part, and Peter you want me to go on with these other dates here?
No, that's okay, I can take it.
Okay, yeah. I just want to add, though, that in 2016, and I found the email to Satsuki in 2016, and I laid out the whole story to Satsuki about what we were doing. And we heard that she had been working with Cameron House back then in 2016. And so we asked Satsuki if she would come and help us and guide us in this community process of addressing clergy sexual abuse. And she was very kind and compassionate for us, and came along and we had a workshop in February of 2017, and it was attended by Satsuki and by Bishop Melissa Skelton, her assisting person, I forget the name of right now, but Bishop, and then Tia Maydell, who was a clinical psychologist with Corrections Canada. And it was a very comprehensive workshop for the community. Thank you.
So you heard a brief summary of all the work that went up to the apology from the church, and that apology took place 7 years ago. And on the back of your pamphlets, you'll have a brief timeline, which you talked about was in between, or just those first 2 points. And I think it's important to see, it's important to see and hear all the work that has gone into this project, all the outreach and collaboration, and listening to the community for what the community wants for its healing efforts. Judy mentioned several bulletin articles. All those bulletin articles are available on our website. On page 14 in the magazine, there is a history that the Healing Fund has compiled, and it cited all of those bulletin articles in each mention for our outreach efforts up to this point. So the church apologized in 2015 for not doing something about Mr. Nakayama's abuse when he confessed his crimes in writing on December 28th, 1994. Then they committed to a reconciliation process with the Japanese Canadian community, but we have to figure out what that actually would look like. Hanazawa and Wendy Matsuguchi in the back there travel across Canada and speak to Japanese Canadian survivors, Japanese Canadian communities. They came back with a substantial report, which we then summarized into this short table on page 14, where the community asked for 3 main requests for a healing fund. One of those is community education and support, which is what these healing funds are meant to do. And it also sent us the task of figuring out exactly what the church knew and when. Judy mentioned that the church, Wendy Fletcher, tried to access a personnel file on Mr. Nakayama, which had been put together and sealed by the Diocese of Calgary. We still have not seen those records, but I'm told that they should be in my email inbox on Tuesday. I just received that notice 2 days ago, which would be great because we'll finally have a record of exactly what happened and who knew what at what time. So when the church apologized in 2015 and they said they really didn't know, I have to almost believe that they didn't know. The current bishops didn't know, and Wendy Fletcher didn't know. and Archdeacon Fenton didn't know because the files had been sealed for so many decades. So in 2020, the small community organization called the Japanese Canadian Working Group joined forces with the national body for Japanese Canadians, known as the NAJC, the National Association of Japanese Canadians. Joined with us today are outgoing President Lori Noikawa and incoming President Kojima. We've been collaborating with both of them for many years now. Lorraine was actually a member of the original JCCA Working Group Task Force. We looked at the 2017-2018 report in more detail and redrafted it to present an ask to the Anglican Church. After many negotiations, we succeeded in getting a funding package of just over $600,000 for education support and for counseling support for members of the community impacted by Mr. Nakayama's crimes. In January, I was hired, and the work began for us. Next, I want to talk a little bit about the open secret of Mr. Nakayama's abuse in the community. When this project started, many people in the community would question whether or not the abuse was real. Who knew what? Were the stories, or the rumors, as it was often put, of pedophilia justified? Or was it just slander? It's been known in the community since the 1930s that Mr. Nakayama was a prolific sex offender, and many families have come forward to us telling us that whenever he was around, they would grab their children, they would tell their children, don't talk to this man, don't go near this man. But because it was an open secret, whenever Mr. Nakayama encountered new communities who didn't know, he would still have access to children. The abuse went on from the 1930s all the way up to the 1980s. And Mr. Nakayama was born in 1900. So even at an exceptionally old age, I just heard a testimony from a community member who told me that Mr. Kominami at Holy Cross Anglican Church in Vancouver once told them that, the Reverend's at it again, chasing boys. And this was after he returned in 1980. A separate testimony tells us that in 1978, a community member actually wrote to the Diocese of New Westminster and the priest in charge at Holy Cross, begging them not to bring Nakayama back from Calgary, which they ended up doing anyway. In the 1950s, Mr. Nakayama, his abuse became so known and the damage was so great that a community member actually wrote to the Primate of Canada, which at that time I think was actually the highest position for the Church of England in Canada, because they wrote to them saying Mr. Nakayama's a sexual abuser. I don't believe they ever received a response. I don't think the church ever acknowledged they got that letter. And then we wanted to research one point further. That's detailed on page 15, the results of our research. The story goes that in 1952, Mr. Nakayama went to Okinawa, and he was sent home in disgrace after he was caught in the act sexually abusing a child. That was 1952. I found the names of the priests who would have caught him in the act, 2 American Episcopalians, Hefner and, well, it's in here on page 15, all the details. So he was sent home, which means the Nippon Seikokai, the Anglican Church in Japan, knew about his crimes, because all priest transfers happen at the bishop level. So there's files. And it also means that Calgary knew. The bishop in Calgary knew about the abuse when he was sent home. The bishopry changed in 1952. One bishop was outgoing, one was incoming. But one of them put Mr. Nakayama on somewhat of an ecclesiastic house arrest. His church was taken away, he wasn't allowed to minister for 6 months. But then it was only 2 years later, there was an article in, I think it was the Anglican, it's on our website. They wrote an article that says, the bishop was saying, or a community member was saying, gee, isn't it sad that there's this one lonely Japanese-Canadian priest? He has this whole congregation, and it looks like he has no support from us. So they gave him a promotion, they gave him his new congregation, and then it was only a couple years later, I think it was still in the 1950s, when they made him canon, which is an honorary title for a church in Calgary, or the greater Calgary area. His church was down in Coaldale, in southern Alberta. So the reason why we're doing all this work on finding out the abuse history of Mr. Nakayama is because, much like the Indigenous communities have pioneered for us and have told us, truth comes before reconciliation. And without truth, without an equal footing or an equal foundation to work up from, we can't actually have meaningful healing. I think that's all for me. I'll pass it back to Judy.
Okay. So I think at this point, we're going to be introducing Satsuki. Isn't that right? Yeah. Okay. I'm just very appreciative that Satsuki and Clinton and Noël are here. And as I said, we initially asked Satsuki to get involved about Mr. Nakayama. It was in October. I saw the email I wrote to Satsuki in October of 2016. That was quite a long time ago. But anyway, I'm going to introduce Satsuki.
Oh, great. Well, I hope it works.
Okay. Maybe my sound will be better too then. Excuse me. So Satsuki Ina, PhD, is Professor Emeritus in the School of Education, and this is what we wrote back in 2016 at California State University, where she taught advanced courses in clinical training. She currently has a private practice in the San Francisco Bay Area, specializing in community trauma. Her clinical and scholarly work has focused on trauma-related issues of racism, abuse, and natural disasters and mass incarceration. She has recently completed a 10-year clergy abuse treatment project for victims of sexual abuse in San Francisco's Chinatown. Treatment focus included individual therapy, couple and family therapy, and educational workshops for Presbytery leaders and the larger Chinatown community. Dr. Ina has also been called on to provide clergy abuse prevention workshops for Buddhist and Christian ministers. Included in the workshop is education regarding characteristics of clergy, pedophilia, long-term consequences of sexual abuse of children, the violation of faith impact on the family and community, and complications regarding unique cultural issues. She continues today as consultant in organizations regarding the formation of a healing task force from within the community, negotiations with responsible organizational religious hierarchy regarding compensation and restoration of trust. And Satsuki is also an award-winning filmmaker, author, activist, psychotherapist, and her ongoing specialty is collective trauma.
So Clinton Huey and Noël Chun have graciously agreed to be here with you. We've been in communication with the healing group here in Vancouver, sharing what we learned from the Cameron House healing experience with the work that you've been doing here. And the group at Cameron House, which is part of the Chinese Presbyterian Church in Chinatown in San Francisco, has produced documents, has made a documentary film, has shared the story of their progress. And so, time, and I think that parallel is a significant factor, that we're actually trained not to complain, particularly not to challenge authority, and to fear that there will be significant consequences, not to the individual, not just the individual, but to the family and to the community. And not only are we parts of an Asian cultural framework, but we're also as a minority in a larger society. So our status also influenced whether, speaking the truth about the problems within our community should be made to the larger society, because we are always struggling for acceptance and belonging. So those are really significant factors that can kind of help explain and understand why it's taking so long. But the work that is being done is so important, and important enough that Clinton and Noël have willingly agreed to come and share their story with you. And I'm honored to have been a part of this from time to time and feel really privileged to be here today. So thank you for coming. I'll just give you a brief personal history, although Judy just did a nice introduction that my mother and father would have been very proud of that.
Well, it's impressive. Can I just add, Satsuki, that you helped us back in 2009 too, because we had the Honoring Our People conference, and that's when we first met you.
Right.
Yeah. So we remembered the help you gave the community and sharing stories back then too. So that's partly why I reconnected with you in 2016.
So that's an important point, Judy, because another parallel, similar, is the trauma we suffered during World War II, our forced removal, and certainly there are differences in the way that your communities and communities in the U.S. Were treated, and the long-term consequences, however, are very resonant. So I was born in the Tule Lake Segregation Center, which was the maximum security prison for Japanese Americans in the States. My parents were Kibei, so they were born in the U.S., in Seattle, and in San Francisco. They were incarcerated, and eventually, when having to face the so-called loyalty questionnaire, they answered no. They felt outraged by what had been done to their families. And then by 1943, they felt complete despair. By then, my brother had been born in the Topaz concentration camp. My mother's pregnant at the time that they were removed, and so she gave birth in Topaz. When they answered no to the loyalty questionnaire, they were segregated to Tule Lake, which was for all the people who were identified as disloyal for protesting. So, and that's where I was born. And by that time, they were living in complete despair about the future for their children. They were, at one level, coerced to renounce their citizenship, but also saw that as a way of going back to Japan, where they'd been educated as children, with the hopes that this would be a safer place for their children to grow up. So the narrative in the U.S. about anybody who answered no had always been the narrative that they were troublemakers, that they were disloyal, that they were traitors. So that story had been suppressed. And though after the war was over and people were released, many people who answered no to the loyalty question, particularly people like my parents who eventually renounced their American citizenship, kept that a secret because they were shamed by their own community members and blamed for being held longer than necessary because there were so many people. So we're working hard, and it's taken decades to change the narrative, to be able to tell the story of people who were courageous enough to challenge authority, to make decisions to protect their families. And so I feel like you're here today because you're dissidents too. You're here to uncover a story that has been suppressed by institutions and culturally valued perspective about how we move on, because we're a minority, but also because that's the right thing to do when you're part of the Asian culture. So my friends here from the San Francisco Chinatown Clergy Abuse Project are also dissidents, troublemakers, and that's the spirit. That's the spirit with which we are here together with you. And in our discussion about how we wanted to be with you today, we didn't want to be on the stage talking to you with some assumed privilege and wisdom. What we want to do is be able to connect with you personally, to be able to have you talk about your stories to share. And we'll do that in the afternoon. We're going to do a healing circle in the afternoon so we could all sit together. And you'll be able to respond to what you heard this morning, but also to be able to share some part of what you're here for. So before we move into the discussion, I'd like to ask you, what brings you here today? And most importantly, if you could say, and maybe take just a second here to reflect on, what is it that you want to take away from our time together today? Many of you have traveled far, have been working on this for a long time. Something brought you here, and we want to do our best that you take home some part of what you had hoped to gain from being here today. Okay, now I'm going to do a little test. Because when I speak to Japanese American communities, when you ask the group the question, nobody raises their hand. Nobody wants to go first. So now I'm going to see if that's true, looking for all these parallels with the Japanese Canadians. So, would anyone like to start just briefly, maybe in a sentence, share what you hope to take home with you today? Okay. You broke the silence. Congratulations.
I'm here because I'm really interested in learning about how the collective is dealing with intergenerational trauma, and everyone has a different experience, but it's all related. So just kind of like widening my perspective and learning from someone who's more of a professional in the field too, like you.
Okay, thank you. Just leave it in the audience. You can pass it to the next. Oh, you have somebody else raising their hand. Okay.
I didn't realize what I was harboring within myself about what happened to my brother. And so what I want is to be able to heal, hopefully, be people to help me heal, and to release this trauma. Because I feel as I'm getting older and reaching 90 years, I feel that it's getting heavier and heavier. And I want that to be taken away from me.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Mary.
Thank you. I'm here seeking more connection and a shared understanding of our collective trauma, so that we might discover what the next steps are, and to take some of the load using tools, and I'm hoping that we can share those in the next steps.
Great, thank you.
I'm actually more interested in the people who are not in this room. We have an Anglican Healing Fund, money put forward by the Anglican Church for 5 years. And it's been open for about a year. Been widely advertised, come forward, apply for these kinds of healing supports, and we've hardly had any people come forward. Hardly any. We know that there were hundreds of boys who were directly affected. Their descendants, there's a lot of people out there who are hurting, who are in pain. There's a lot of things here that are going on for them. And they don't want to be re-traumatized. It's really difficult for them to, come forward. I'm interested in this session in learning more about how we can connect with those people so that they will come forward and share their stories, and that we can provide some healing support too.
Thank you.
I'm just going to talk off the top of my head, but I think there's some unusual words that are coming up, and one of them is, I think there's a lot of ghosts in our community, and I'd like to honor them, to say this abuse happened for so long, and so many people have passed away, and they've never been able to speak about this. And then we're running through this other generation, so we're saying, why aren't people coming forward? So we need to stand up, and I'm so happy to be here around all this strength. I feel this strength, I feel this energy that we're ready and we're going to learn. I want skills, I want techniques. I want to know how to talk to the elders, my family, because I know this exists, it's so widespread. And this is not just about Reverend Nakayama, it's also about widespread, I believe there was widespread sexual abuse and trauma that occurred in the internment camps. So this is a big, I'm not trying to overblow this and make it, but maybe we do need to. It's okay, we're able to, and let's learn how to do this. Let's get some, I work with skills, and I want to work with the truth of the history, and I'm tired of this idea that, we have to live with this open, secret way of being, and that doesn't have to be part of our culture anymore. It's changed. So anyways, I'm really grateful to be here, and thank you, Naomi, for giving me that extra push to come here. So, and I appreciate everything that you've worked through.
Everyone's been talking about the
Can you
past,
hold it a little closer?
past people, and I'm just hoping that the next few generations won't be like my parents who kept everything quiet and respected the clergy. That's all.
Thank you.
I'm not a descendant of a survivor, but I am deeply interested in healing. I just think we're at a place, at a time on our planet where there's such incredible potential for healing. So I'm here for connection to our community, because I'm one of the assimilated east of the Rockies, come back to this territory to reclaim my own heritage.
and I'm really interested in community healing as well. So insights, steps, skills, and as well, when I looked at the apology from the Anglican Church, I was not satisfied. And I'm really interested in how perceived authority acknowledges the truth. And it's not enough to just apologize. A true, steps in making progress are, and so what are we going to do about it internally as an institution, so that these things will never happen again.
Thank you. May not seem that way, but I think the healing is beginning today. Just being able to share. And also want to invite, as feelings and emotions come up for you, to know that it's very appropriate and not something that Asian American and maybe Asian Canadians tend to feel embarrassment if tears come up or anger comes up. But I want to invite you to be able to, if it comes up and you can, share it. It's something that we're all experiencing, and you may be able to lead us in connecting with that part of what's going on. This is not just going to be an intellectual, cognitive, skill-building workshop. It is an important part that we are together. The abuse was communal. Mr. Nakayama abused the community. And so the healing is going to be in the community. And so this is it. This is how we start. It's the person sitting next to you, listening to the other person's perspective, is the beginning of the path. So before I introduce and invite Noël and Clinton to share their experience, I wanted to just quickly go over some basic principles. They're in your handout. Just some words so that we have some shared vocabulary and understanding about the abuse itself. The other thing I'm getting from your conversation already is, we're talking about trauma that took place during trauma. There was certainly sexual abuse that took place in the Japanese American prison camps that we know of as well. And when you have thousands of people confined or forced removal and loss of their belongings and their homes, a lot of the mental illness aspects are become manifested and acted out, and with little protection in the dispersal that you experienced and the incarceration inside of confined sites as well. So in some ways, the criminal activities that did occur were, one, kept secret by the community itself inside during the imprisonment and the removal, but also suppressed by the institution as well. So it is a incubating place for mental illness, criminal activity, things that we really haven't talked about publicly. We wanted to promote the idea that we were such good citizens that there was nothing bad going on. But incarceration and forced removal is a place where a lot of those things started to get acted out. So this is just a short list so that we have shared understanding. I'm not going to read it to you, but I wanted you to be able to have it. So we also found that in talking particularly about clergy sexual abuse, that many people don't know, maybe don't want to know what it entails. Is it just the way he talked to people, that he went to bed with them? We have this very global or general, don't touch the subject kind of thing. So this definition, I think, is very important because it includes primarily a betrayal of trust. And abuse, particularly clergy sexual abuse, is an abuse of power. The person has license and authority to get gratification, their own personal gratification, mostly without fear of consequences. So it could be overt and covert. It could include touching and non-touching. There's often a grooming period, which is very seductive, where the child and the family, because you cannot extract the parents from the abuse, because the parents were also seduced into believing and trusting in this religious leader that made it possible for them to have access to the children. The verbal seduction or abuse includes anal and vaginal intercourse, oral sex, manual stimulation, direct or implied threats, or other forms of abuse by a person believed to have authority. And this is often a really difficult part for people who have been victimized to talk about. So we use more and more of these kind of global terms, and in that way, it's hard to often grasp really what that child had to endure. And so one of the skills is not to intrude or impose your curiosity or your need to know, but to make it safe enough that the victim is able to disclose very specifically what they had to endure. And see, that's the heart of the secret that the person often has to hold. They might tell someone, I was abused, but they were alone, without help, and nobody else witnessed the direct sexual abuse that took place. So if it's safe enough and the person is able to tell you exactly what happened, I've found as a therapist, it's a great relief for them that someone else has that knowledge. And it's not something that happens right. It's helpful to them to think about the perpetrator as mentally ill, because that kind of removes them from having been the cause. Many, these are young boys that both the perpetrator for the clergy sexual abuse in Chinatown and Mr. Nakayama's actions were young boys, and their identity is developing, and it's very typical for a victim of that age to feel like they caused it, or there was something wrong with them, that they were chosen to be the victim. So there are many of these kind of misunderstandings because of the developmental stage of the victim. And the younger they are when the abuse takes place, the less they have the construct, the situation to understand. They will fall into the definition of their experience based on their developmental stage. It's not unusual and very typical for a sexual abuse perpetrator to have a target victim pool. And from what I've learned so far, so the perpetrator could target pubescent children that are from 14 to 17 or 18 years old. Many of the perpetrators that I have worked with actually were what they call an ebevophile. So they are interested in prepubescent children. There's a lot of theory about why that is. But perpetrators tend to have a particular age group that they target, that they're attracted to, that they feel like they could take advantage of. The predator, the abuser, is looking for self-gratification and looking for ways and often have been granted authority. So it could be a family member who is an abuser, who has some kind of privilege and mostly access, and repeated contact with victims so that they could repeatedly abuse. So what that means from a trauma point of view is that if there's chronic abuse, chronic states of trauma, there's going to be more disturbance for the victim. So if you have one car accident, your body, your brain, your nervous system responds to this one incident, and then people make sure they don't go down that intersection, or they never buy a red car again, or whatever. They feel like they can prevent it from happening again. Oftentimes in predators' realm of acting out on their illness, they have repeated access. And repeated access for the victim means that that child is always anticipating the next time. And maybe it's going to be the next adult, maybe not the same person, but because they are in so many ways helpless and unprotected, and depending on the message that the predator gives to the kid. And religious predators are known to use their religious status to keep it secret. So, you've committed a sin, let us pray, things like that. The blaming of the child, or this is a secret just between you and me because you're special to me. This is something that if you tell anybody, harm will come to your family. All these ways that psychologically the predator can keep the child from ever sharing their experience. So the silence has been perpetrated along with the abuse. So they're primary victims, that is the child who experiences the direct physical, emotional, sexual abuse, and the secondary victim is a family member, a friend, even a witness. Sometimes these they're known sexual predators who were clergy, who could gather a group together and play games that are actually acts of sexual abuse. And everybody promises to keep this our little secret. So trauma, and it's important that we understand what trauma is. Trauma is an experience outside the range of normal human experience. And we develop coping skills to difficult times and particularly traumatic experiences. But if you're a child, you have barely begun to understand what you need to do when you're threatened, because that's what trauma is. It's a threat to your well-being. So this is why child abuse is so difficult to find, address, and treat, because the child has very limited ability to think through how to protect themselves for the next time or during the act itself. And often the perpetrator makes sure that emotionally and psychologically they can split the kid's connection to their parent. And this is why clergy abuse is so powerful, because the clergy could call on higher power and say, your parents, if they know this, they'd be so ashamed of you. They can use that kind of religious doctrine to blame the child and to keep it secret. Many people don't recognize that secondary trauma is almost equally as damaging to the victim. And in our community, secondary trauma is not just the repeat of the sexual abuse, but it's the denial of the abuse. It's the ignoring of it. It's the suppressing of it. It's in many ways the way in which the church protects the predator that causes this self-questioning, this feeling that something's wrong with me because nobody in my family or my community or my church is recognizing and acknowledging how I was hurt. So then the person again feels that this is greater than any capacity I have to cope with. So I should be quiet. I should give up. I should keep this to myself. And then they live in this silent, anxiety-ridden, or depressed state. And this is what happens. Then the survivor figures out how to cope. Because trauma overwhelms our coping capacity, an initial response is to compartmentalize and do what I can to forget, to not think about it, and just put it away. And human beings have this amazing capacity to do that. The only time that, for some, especially childhood trauma, is there's some kind of trigger, some event, some word, something close enough to the actual trauma itself that could open up that silenced box of memory. And so when we approach healing, this is another skill factor too. When you're beginning to do work with the community who has had trauma, you're likely to trigger people's memories or the feelings that they keep in abeyance most of the time. And so safety, you have to figure out all the ways to make it safe for anyone to share, to even if they don't share, to just experience a feeling and be keeping it manageable for them. So for example, today, one of the reasons I wanted to be physically close to you instead of being separated from you is because I'm always watching to see how each of you are responding to what we're talking about. Because one word I use or one word Clinton might use could be a trigger for you. And you might have a reaction. I want you to know that having that reaction is a good response here. That this is, for the most part, a safe place because we're here for a common reason. And that you don't have to hide it or you don't have to suppress it. And if you experience discomfort and you want to share it, I want to invite you to do that. If you need to step outside, excuse me. If you need to step outside, we have people here that will step outside with you to help you talk about it and to debrief it. But also, there's something very powerful about debriefing it in the session to just help you connect with it and talk about it. And then the last word is the thriver. And that is somebody who has sought active healing. Not healing by suppression, but healing by sharing their story. By seeking out community and connection. Many of you use that word today, connection. It is an important part of the healing because so much of the abuse is isolating. And so what happens then is you're not just coping. The victim isn't just coping. They are activated to make the trauma that they suffered something that they can share with others who need healing as well.